Environment.
Yes. Semiconductor emission and implications.
Thank you, ICS, and thank you, MIT, for inviting me. So, the topic is China's semiconductor ambition and implications for India. At the onset, let me talk about the applications of semiconductors. So today it is like if you look at this, you can actually see that in all these sectors, after we talk about agriculture, cell phones, defense systems, medical imaging, IoTs, and in automotive industry, we talk about automatic driver assistance systems. So it's everywhere. If you talk about sensors, and talk about the preamplifiers which are used for those sensors, and the processors which are used for those systems. Semiconductors is everywhere that you have. It's almost all walks of your life today in practice. Just that's why when you go 30 years back, like everything was manual or like mechanical systems. Like today you have everything electronics. That's where it is. Well, let's just look at the history of semiconductors. That 1906, when the first IO was invented, we had vacuum tubes being used for systems to when the first transistor was developed by William Shockley, John Batty, and Gordon Batty in 1947. And again in 1955 to 60, when the first MOSFET was developed. And now what you have in the planar technology, MOSFETs which are developed in that time, to what we have in FinFETs that we talk about today when we talk about 2 nanometer technologies and the lower submicron technologies. Going further, you have gate all around technology which is coming up to be like just to curtail the amount of leakage currents that you are having in the current MOSFETs. And also the body effect that we see in the current MOSFETs where you can actually bring in more amount of precision in the amount of current that you are trying to handle over there, and also the lower voltages. And the next invention by Samsung, which is NDC, multi-channel FET in fact, so multi-channel FETs. And this is semiconductor value chain. So let me just look at like what it involves in developing a semiconductor. So you have the wafers which come up, which is part of the materials, ingot which is used for preparing the semiconductor, and then you have the equipments which come up, which manufacture the semiconductors, and then you have your IPs, intellectual properties, which are used for manufacturing, and also the EDAs, electronic design automation tools, which are, let's say, for example, Cadence, Synopsys. These are some of the tools that are being used today. And design. When it comes to design, of course, like India being one of the top of design, I can tell you that nearly 50% of the world's design happens in India. And they perform. Taiwan being one of the pioneers where manufacturing happens in India. Most of it, literally 70% of the manufacturing happens in Taiwan. So that's the difference. And also packaging. Majority of it is happening in Southeast Asian countries where the packaging is happening, and India is pouring into that given the kind of chiplet technology that is happening that we are using those tools. Then comes that you are using these ICs into your development of systems. Where to use these chips and semiconductors to develop systems. And you give it to an EMS company that is actually mounted on the boards, and that's where you see that you can assemble as part of the product, be it a cell phone or a car. That's the product. So now let's look at where China is. So China is the largest consumer of and the irony is like more than 80% of it is being India catching up. engineering programs in semiconductor design in 5 major universities. This is, I'm talking about somewhere around 1956 to 65 time frame. And by mid 70s, they were able to have research conducted in their state labs where manufacturing would happen in their state funded factories. And by 1972, they were producing the first, third generation computers over there. And the economic reforms which happened in 1978, they imported around 24 second-hand semiconductor lines to manufacture some of these ICs. This I'm talking about somewhere in 1978, in fact, around 1990s. I'm not going into whether they succeeded in it or whether they failed in it. I'm just looking into the attempts that they were making at each and every point. And around 1990, they to accelerate the technological advancements, they started partnering with foreign firms. In fact, to say where they could see that like they can progress in technological advancements. And around 1995, they had a JV with Lucent Technologies to develop housing into an IDM. In fact, to say one of the major IDMs for that. When I talk about an IDM, it is integrated device manufacturer. Just to give an example, Texas Instruments is an IDM, which designs its own IC, manufactures its own IC, and sells it into the market. Around 96 to 2000, it aims to produce internationally competitive chips using Chinese intellectual property, where it's in-house developed Chinese IPs are used for developing its ICs. And 2014, they set up a China Integrated Circuit Industry Fund and additionally China Government Guidance Fund to invest into semiconductor companies. That's when the Made in China policy came up. And as you know, from 2018 to 2022, there were US restrictions on semiconductor companies, especially for new developments and all. And December 2023, China prohibits use of CPUs which use processors from US companies. And September 2024, China announces significant advancements in domestic DUV machines. So one of the speakers were talking about, in fact, it's a DUV and EUV earlier, in fact, so which are used in lithography. So when we talk about lithography, it is like about defining the geometries of the IC. When we talk about geometries, it's basically the gate of the MOSFET, which we are defining. As we try to make it much smaller and smaller, it will have many issues cropping up when it comes to specifically looking at the exact aspects of the device. So when EUV is not available and they have to use only DUV technology, which is used up to 22 nanometers currently outside, and EUV is used for submicron technologies. What you will have to do is like multi-pattern it, and also you'll have to do a lot of research on the materials which are used for etching and all. So it's a long drawn process which it involves. In fact, to say little, it's a costly process also, but given the kind of sanctions they have on their companies, they are restrained to go ahead with such kind of stuff. The yield would be less initially, but they would be refining it. And the latest news is like they are able to do this at 5 nanometer technology. So which US and all these guys were able to do it at, they use EUV for 5 nanometers and lower technologies, they are able to use that with DUV, in fact, to say, and developed. And SMIC has come up with that, in fact. This is what it actually caught my sight, in fact. So when I actually read the policy, I have just taken a snapshot of that and I have put it over here. Probably I will just generate that, like, however, China is still in the process of industrialization and there is still a major gap compared with advanced countries. The manufacturing industry is large but not strong. The capacity for independent innovation is weak, and key and core technologies and high-end equipment are highly dependent on foreign countries. The manufacturing innovation system with enterprises are, as the mainstay, is not perfect. Product quality is not high, and there is a lack of world-renowned brands. The efficiency of resource and energy utilization is low, and the problem of environmental pollution is more pronounced. The industrial structure is unreasonable, and the development of high-end equipment manufacturing and producer service lags behind other countries. The level of information is not high, and the depth of integration with industrialization is insufficient. The degree of industrial internationalization is not high, and the globalization of enterprises is inadequate to promote the construction of a manufacturing powerhouse. We must focus on solving the above problems. Well, here it's a clear problem statement, clearly defined. Yeah, right? So I'll just give you what was the other one. To build a manufacturing powerhouse, we must firmly seize the rare strategic opportunity, actively respond to challenges, strengthen overall planning, highlight innovation drivers, formulate special policies, give full play to institutional advantages, mobilize the whole of the society to work hard, rely more on Chinese equipment and depend on Chinese brands, from made in China to created in China. This is an important statement. And the transformation of Chinese speed to Chinese quality, the transformation of Chinese products to Chinese brands, and the complete strategic task of growing Chinese manufacturing from big to strong. A very important statement, given that like they have been a manufacturing house all these days, they want to build brands internally over here. You know, you're talking about Apple, you're talking about Microsoft, you're talking about Tesla, and all these are product companies based out of US, in fact, to say. But like when you look at these, they want to build their own products, which can compete with the world, in fact, to say. Let me just quickly move to the other point. Yeah, this is on the China semiconductor growth story. If you look at the number of semiconductor design firms in China from 2010 to 2002, you can see a drastic increase, in fact. So I have picked these data from IITF. I can tell you there are literally more than 3,000 odd companies. In India, like you can just count them in fingers, the number of product companies which are there over here. And now, when you look at the global semiconductor industry and the product companies which are based out of US, which are literally there, like you can see them on the top, and China is somewhere at the bottom, in fact, to see, which are stationed, headquartered in US. Going to the manufacturing segment, back-end growth. This is, I'm talking about the fab and the ATMP facilities that you can look at. China is somewhere at the top notch, like where you can see them almost like 120 fabs, which are in, which are IDMs, in fact, to say. Number of ATMP facilities which are there, number of fabs which are coming up now recently between 2022 to 2025, and the Chinese equipments being used. The number of Chinese equipments that are there in the Chinese industry are just less than 15%. They are trying to see that like where they can occupy majority of that space. Research and development. You may be thinking where India is, like you'll see only in this graph over here. So when it comes to research and development, of course, they are still leaders in that after United States and US. India is somewhere the fourth, in fact, to say. And when you look at the R&D expenditure also, of course, China is lagging behind on that, on the amount of R&D expenditure that they are doing. But like when you look at the number of patent applications, they are at the top now, currently. State subsidies. You would be wondering like how come these people are able to manufacture so much at lower cost and all those things. It's basically funded by state subsidies. In fact, if you look at SMIC, Tsinghua Group, and I'm to say they are majorly, and TSMC is nowhere near to it, and also Intel and Samsung. The amount of state subsidies that they are receiving from the government. Thank you. But like, let me closing note on the conclusion, right? I would just take 30 seconds. I was just brief you about my own experience when it comes to the implications. So me being from the semiconductor industry, having my own company, which is a fabless semiconductor IC company, which is the power management ICs, way back in 2015 and 16, when the central government came up with this Ujala scheme, replacing all these incandescent and as well as the CFL tubes and all those things with LED lamps, Central government came up with a tender, and EESL was the body which was awarded with it, and which was supposed to replace all these things. Like, it was a huge volume, and most of the OEMs in India were looking at like where they could actually reduce the cost and bring it at a cheaper price where they can win the bids over there. So that's when some of the fabs based out of China, who were IGBT fabs, entered the scene, and they actually picked some IPs from Taiwan for the control sections, some MOSFETs, stitched it onto a normal PCB and pushed it into the Indian market at 3 cents. We were standing somewhere at 8 cents per IC. That was my cost price. Their sale price was 3 cents. So when India came up with this program, they didn't look into the implications of what it would mean for the MSME sector over here. Literally, many more than, if I have to tell you, most of the MSMEs shut down at that point of time. And I had to shut down one of my testing units at that point of time. We were not able to deal with it. Within a span of 3 months, the BOM price of an LED bulb, just fell from 600 rupees to 40 rupees. Most of the bill of materials and whatever you had became redundant within a period of 3 months. That's an implication of what you can actually see. Right? Thank you.